We're pulling item 3, and we may end up moving some things around so we can handle all of the executive sessions at the end. So with that, we can start off with item 1, unless there's any other changes to the agenda that I missed. Okay. Item 1 is new hire, 97% of market, specialty court, and this would be, Samantha Wallace will be handling that.
Hi, Samantha Wallace, Deputy Trial Court Administrator for the record. Judge Meyer wanted us to ask that her new law clerk, and she did start on Monday, Camille Rotenberry, be started at step 7 on the Attorney 1 pay plan. She was currently hired at 97% of market, but she is asking for her to be hired at $79,851.20. She was a prosecutor for almost a year, so she is a fully fledged attorney.
Okay, so my paperwork says something different. Hang on here. Oh, okay, so I'm looking at the 24 wages. We're about a month away from the 24 wages, and that's what she would be making in that. So is it possible to wait that month?
Oh, absolutely.
So it would still be a step 5, but the step 5 is moving from the 75 to the 79.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, it would be about $600 shy, it looks like. Step 5. Oh, no, hang on here. 79,851. So, yeah, about $500 difference between step 5 in 2024 and step 5 today. Step 7 today.
Okay.
So, do you need an executive session, or is that?
No, that's fine.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Yes. So, I guess, do we need a motion? I guess we don't, because we're not approving the step 7. We're keeping it step 5, right? So. Okay. Thank you. All right. Item 2, position conversion. So this is the Sheriff's Division, the jail, and there was some confusion because conversions had happened in the past, and Captain Heil is here to talk about this. I guess my original thing is we're control room operator supervisors supervising custody technicians.
Yes, Jeremy Howell for the record. So confirmed with HR that all of the control room operators were transferred to custody techs. Okay. And there, I guess we had one control room operator supervisor still supervising the custody techs. And since he's retired, we're just asking to transfer that position to a custody tech like the rest of them.
Perfect. Okay. That makes sense. Thank you very much for that clarification. All right, questions, motion?
No questions. I move that we approve the position conversion with the Sheriff's Office at the jail.
Second. I don't know who I'm waiting for.
Commissioner Matari?
Aye.
Chair Duncan?
Aye. All right, item 3 was pulled, so item 4. I'm sorry? Oh, thank you. Item 4, FY24 proposed pay ranges for position vacancy postings. And Sylvia?
With the board, pending approval of the board's budget, September 1st, within that plan is different higher salary ranges with the COLA. And what we're asking is if HR can start posting the new salary ranges with the disclaimer that says this pay range will go into effect September 24th, but we're wanting to renew a lot of our advertising and post those new ranges and hopefully attract more candidates to Kootenai County. And so I'm seeking direction from the board to proceed forward with that.
Okay. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm fine with that.
Okay. Item 2, motion?
I move that we approve the FY24 proposed pay ranges for position vacancy postings.
Second.
Commissioner Matari?
Aye.
Chair Duncan?
Aye. All right. Do we want to handle 6 and 7 before item 5? I think item 5 will take a little bit longer. So does that matter? Are you good with that?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. All right, item 6, proposed step anniversary criteria, human resources.
All right, what I have provided for the board is some proposed step anniversary criteria. Over the past several years, when bonuses were given, there were some stipulations that employees had to be in satisfactory performance, and that if they had any performance issues, at that time it was 12 months, we're looking at 9 months in this criteria, that they would not be eligible for the increase. So with the step anniversary, since this is the first year we're really putting that in place and implementing step anniversary increases, I wanted to check with the board to see if you wanted any performance criteria considered for employees to receive and be eligible for the step anniversary increase. So included in that, some of the things that, the criteria, the conditions that would have to be met are no documented performance issues in the preceding 9 months from the employee step anniversary date. Documented performance includes a performance improvement plan, last chance agreement, involuntary demotion, suspension without pay, more than one written reprimand. And then, so that's the performance issues. The other criteria is that if an employee, now that we're doing the step fixes, they may be moved up to their max. So then they wouldn't be eligible for another step because there isn't another step to go to. So this is some criteria for the board to consider if you want to put anything like that in place.
I'd be curious to understand what the, what's behind a written reprimand. Is there a verbal? Is it like a warning? Is there a verbal warning typically beforehand? What's the criteria for that?
And it depends on the severity of the issue. Typically, you're coaching your staff initially and doing some verbal conversations with them. For example, say someone's late. I'm just thinking of something simple. Is late, and you've had conversations with them, nothing improves. You look at, is there an ability to modify their schedule by 15 minutes to a half hour? You try and do that. But if it's habitual and there's no improvement when you've asked the employee to improve, that would be a condition where you would do a written reprimand.
So it's not an initial step typically, it's a secondary step.
Yes, unless it's so severe that they felt like they needed to document it with the written reprimand in their personnel file.
Yeah, I'm inclined to look at just having one, largely because, if you've been informed verbally and you do not correct your behavior, I think the last thing we should be doing is rewarding people with a step pay increase in that sense.
Okay. I know, Brett, when we talked about this and you looked at it, you were concerned with the way you guys do written reprimands, so I don't know if you want to give some feedback into that, because this section would tie into then their performance metrics that they're putting together.
Under Sheriff Brett Nelson for the record. Commissioner, in regards to the measurables we had submitted for consideration, one of the issues we had was, Sylvia and I had a discussion in regards to the one written reprimand, but when we spoke to more than one written reprimand, well, it could be two separate instances where you had one, if you will, failure in this policy or procedure and another one totally unrelated. The one thing that we spoke to was part of that was having verbal warnings, as we were speaking to, and performance log notes not being a disqualifying factor because that's progressive discipline, right? Mm-hmm. But the one issue we discussed internally within the organization is you could have a policy failure, some type that's totally unrelated to something else. Then the discussion arose about whether it's one or two, more than two, or for purposes of that, so that more than one written reprimand. We're okay with that because if it doesn't consider the verbal warnings and performance log notes, which would be included because it's progressive discipline.
So what's that? That means one reprimand would be sufficient?
Correct. As it states there, more than one, you have the more than one. Well, again, if it's unrelated, I think there's a discussion to have there, meaning they're unrelated written reprimands.
Yeah. I think in the end, though, that there's a verbal discussion beforehand, right? So there
Yes.
is plenty of opportunity prior to documenting this in writing for an employee to correct any behavior.
That is correct.
Okay.
Robert Norris. In some cases, there is, but some cases, Robert Norris, Sheriff, in some cases, the violation might be so significant that we impose discipline to change behavior. We don't impose discipline to punish people. So I'm afraid that if we get too restrictive with it, then you're going to be taking a tool away from us to be able to manage and supervise our people because we want them to change a particular behavior. And I guess one would be a good example would be a social media violation. If you have a nexus to the sheriff's office and you're posting something on social media and we talk to you, say, hey, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. And then if the violation continues, we might say that a written reprimand or suspension without pay is appropriate. But if we get too restrictive in these, then it kind of restricts our ability to change behavior within our organization.
Just out of curiosity, what does restrictive mean to you? So I understand how you're using that word.
Well, because I think that you might create a culture that would allow dismissing certain behavior because, well, we believe we need to change the behavior, but is it rise to the occasion where he or she's not going to receive a step?
But in your example, you gave 3. Don't post this on social media, don't post this on social media, don't post this on social media. And you can put inside an employee's file, I believe, that a verbal warning was given, so it's there. And that it's made clear that if we have to go to a written warning, that could affect your step increase. I mean, I guess in essence, the question is how many times do you have to explain to an adult they shouldn't be doing something in order for it to actually have a meaningful effect?
See, so if we impose a written reprimand and then we impose another written reprimand for something of totally different in nature, then we would create, I believe, you'd be restricting us, maybe not verbatim, but from a culture standpoint, you're going to cause first-line supervisors to second-guess themselves to say, hey, wait a minute, if I do this, this is going to likely restrict them from getting a step increase.
But that doesn't change with 2 written reprimands. I mean, they'll issue one, and then the second one will still lead to that same challenge for a supervisor.
Doesn't, can I see the policy? Doesn't say more than one reprimand?
Yes.
Yeah.
So you're still faced with the same issue, but now you have an employee who has ignored several verbal warnings, perhaps, gotten a written warning, and now that supervisor is still faced with the same decision. Should I implement this written reprimand, knowing that it will affect their step?
Yeah.
I mean, part of the reason I'm kind of pushing back on this is because, and I've said this before, if we're going to pay people more, we should be able to demand more. And so if we're going to give people verbal warnings and put that in their file, and they should know that if we have to put this in writing, this could affect their step, then that would also affect behavior, I would like to think.
I would agree.
And making that clear, and as long as we properly document these instances, because to me a written reprimand is where an employee is signing saying, I acknowledge. Is that correct? I acknowledge that I've been given notice now, and they're signing that document versus a verbal.
They can, and some probably don't.
But usually that's a good way to do that.
Because you want them to acknowledge, here's my expectations, yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've done this a fair amount in my career, so I kind of know how that works when it comes to explaining to adults what is expected of them, especially if there's a policy manual, and the supervisor working with that person verbally and making a note in their file.
I would tend to agree and support that, because my concern would be if somebody gets a written reprimand and then they do something else and they're verbally warned. I mean, I would think one written reprimand would have a huge effect, and that they would not be likely to violate a different separate policy if they're already on notice. So. Did you want to add anything as a performance measure, like they need to be fulfilling their job duties or anything like that? Or you just want to make it negative?
Well, I think that it would automatically be considered that they are performing their job duties if there are no negative comments. So
Okay,
I don't think that would be necessary, and it would probably add a burden to the supervisor.
okay. That is fine.
I trust that the board, at its discretion, if this isn't working, would be able to revisit this
Absolutely.
and modify it as it sees fit. So,
Yes, what we would do is implement this for fiscal year '24, run it through the whole year, because if we did it midstream, if we tried to change our process mid-year, those who were
Yeah.
penalized, and hopefully we're not gonna have that many that aren't
Yeah.
gonna meet this criteria. Those should be one-offs, basically. We'd wanna at least keep this in place for this full year of fiscal year '24, and we can bring it back and have you look at it and see if there's anything that needs to be changed.
Yeah, I would agree. And the issue too becomes getting this information out to the employees so they understand what's expected of them. So they know if they're to the verbal warning level, that maybe they need to really not let it go any further. Is that good?
yeah.
Okay.
Do you need a motion or?
Yes. we
Yes,
would.
and then are we changing the written reprimand to one?
One.
One. Okay.
So if they have one written reprimand, they're not going to get their increase.
Well, that's what we were talking about.
Okay. I'm just.
Well, I mean, there could be
Checking.
multiple verbals. I mean, it's not like it has to be.
Right.
But
Okay.
if I mean,
Okay.
correct me if I'm wrong here, but if we're dealing with adults and they're being informed, this is what needs to happen, this is the policy. If this continues, I'm going to have to give you a written reprimand,
Which
and
would
that
then-
will affect your step increase. I think that is a pretty sufficient tool for a supervisor to manifest change. And if they can't manifest change at that point, then the written reprimand is now part of the document within their employee file.
Robert Norris, so just for clarification, then the suspension without pay, those would be days served without pay. Is that clear?
That's what we're doing now. But yes, so a suspension, days without pay, would affect that step increase.
Because we use the term held in abeyance.
I'm sorry, say that again.
So we give another opportunity, okay, I'm giving you, or I am administering you 10 days without pay, held in abeyance, and then if for the next 12 months, 6 months, you don't do something of similar nature, then those 10 days go away. But if you do something of similar nature, then we're going to impose the 10 days and add whatever the new violation is. So that wouldn't apply to that because those aren't days actually served in suspension.
But is it written? Would it be considered a written reprimand?
Or-
It would be considered a written, yes.
Yeah,
So,
yep.
I don't know, I feel like you're restricting our ability to manage our people to a degree that each elected should. Does anybody else not agree? Stan, anybody?
I mean, this is a good opportunity for people to speak up while we're discussing this.
If I could have the question repeated, I believe I heard it, but I just want to make sure that, does the board want the prosecutor to weigh in on a proposal from the sheriff's office? I don't want to overstep my bounds
Well,
here.
this isn't I don't
County
believe this is I don't believe this is a sheriff's office policy. It's a county policy.
So if someone in your department had gotten a written reprimand once, then they would be ineligible for their step increase.
No, I understand that. I was mistaken. I thought this was in relation to the sheriff's request to compress the pay scale and initiate their own unique pay. Okay. So this is part of the entire Kootenai County. Well, I can speak on behalf of my office. You know, when it comes to training and disciplining, we take the step approach, I believe, as well. We have verbal warnings, and then we have, you know, forms of written discipline performance plans. And so I do think that if we're going to limit a written discipline as being, let me back up and state this a different way. If all it's going to take is one written form of discipline that'll preclude somebody from getting a step increase, I do think this may cause there to be a lot more verbal warnings as a way to ensure that people are still getting their steps. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and if we had 5 written reprimands, we'd get a lot more 4 written reprimands until the 5th one, I think. And, you know, in the end, it's really just a matter of, you know, how many chances do you want to give somebody before they follow policy? And nothing's forever, but the reality is that you're automatically getting a step increase by virtue of making it to your anniversary date.
Sure.
So that's a given. And now the question is, you know, how well are you performing, you know, in your department under supervision? And if you're given verbal warnings on multiple occasions, what tool sets are left for the manager?
No, and I agree. Is there anything in the policy that says after so many verbal warnings, there has to be a written warning?
No.
And that's where I'm going with this is are we creating an atmosphere where now department heads or supervisors are just not going to be issuing written disciplines anymore, and they're just going to be issuing a whole lot of verbal warnings?
Well, if not, they're not able to manifest change. I'm not so sure that person should be a supervisor or should keep that person in the department. I mean, you know, in the end, there's a series of escalations. However many steps there are, you know, becomes irrelevant because wherever there's a trigger for an actual change, it's going to bump up against that. And, you know, again, my take on this a little bit is that if I'm going to go to the taxpayers and ask for tax increases to give employees a raise to the point where it's at a more market rate, I think it's only fair to demand a little bit more.
And I totally support that. If we're going to be paying people more, we should expect more.
Yeah. So how many chances do you want to give somebody? And typically with written, you need to have multiple breaking of the same policy.
And I agree. That's traditionally how the prosecutor's office operates. We don't just usually don't jump straight to a written form of discipline.
Yeah.
We handle things at the lowest level possible.
Exactly.
And expect changes to be made. And so, you know, I'm okay with this. You know, I don't think this is something that's going to cause my office to have to operate differently.
Okay.
And once again, expectations, getting this out to our employees, I think is going to be crucial.
Dave.
We hire 18, 19, 20-year-olds. We try to get them early. Today's employment market individual is different than it was 15, 20 years ago. So that's submitted.
Okay. Dave?
Can I offer a thought? I think you have 2 elected officials in the room, but ostensibly this is maybe a more contentious issue than you thought it would be. maybe you might consider discussing this at the next elected officials meeting as a topic before deciding, making a decision. I would think the other elected officials may have other comments that may be impactful.
Is that going to be a problem timing-wise?
We would need to have this in place by October 1st.
Or
Because-
September 24th?
Well, September 24th would be better, but anybody who has an anniversary date October 1, we would have to know, do they meet
Gotcha.
our criteria or not meet the criteria? Because you're gonna have somebody with an October 1 step anniversary that we'd have to consider giving them that increase.
I think it would actually have to be September 24th, because that's the first day of the pay period in which October 1st falls. So we need to have a policy in place by the beginning of that pay period so that we can process that payroll batch appropriately. So
Yeah.
by the first day of the pay period, on the 24th would be the correct day.
Okay.
Because
So-
the way we're looking at it is if, say, like Brandy's indicated, if somebody's anniversary is October 1st, whatever that beginning of that pay period is, they get credit for that whole week. We're not saying on October 1, we're gonna recalculate and make an adjustment. That's just an accounting nightmare for the staff
Sure.
and payroll.
Okay, so September 20th, we can put it as an action item on the elected officials meeting, and then we can just ratify it on the business meeting of the 26th, which we're not going to have a business meeting till maybe Thursday that week. But it doesn't matter because go ahead,
If you
Dave.
approve it at that elected officials meeting as an action item, it will take effect.
Okay, okay.
I have another question.
Sure.
If we have time. So if this takes effect late September, if somebody receives a written form of discipline, they received it last week. This is a new policy. Is something that happened before this policy takes effect going to affect them in the future? Because if we're
Could.
talking about putting people on notice, I don't know if that's necessarily fair to hold that against them when they didn't have notice that this was going to happen in the future.
The policy goes into effect, anything that happens from that date moving forward, I think would affect the step increase. Anything prior to the policy, I don't think you can carry that forward fairly.
Well, the issue is, so somebody's been suspended without pay at August 1 because of something egregious, and their anniversary date's October 1, so they're going to go ahead and get their raise because,
I would argue that's the luck of the draw. You know,
Alright.
that these policies are not meant to be absolute, but to be implemented as time goes by.
I think I would caution against something retroactive, especially
Yeah.
considering the sheriff's office for cause employment standard.
Yeah.
I think moving forward, you can certainly change the policy and expect people to understand how to implement it and what would be effective, not retroactive.
okay.
Probably something to discuss at the elected officials.
Correct.
Okay.
Another topic.
There's a lot of discretion for the board here.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so that one is going to be taken up September 20th. And we can go on to item 7, new hire benefit premium deductions. Sylvia.
All right, we're coming before the board to ask for some consideration. When we hire new employees and the way our process works for collecting health, dental, and vision premiums, we collect the premium the month before it's effective. So when an employee gets hired, they're basically having to cover almost a full month's of premium. So say someone is hired this week, they've got to cover their premiums for August, and then we collect a partial payment for their September premiums. And that could be an impact of about $500 to their first paycheck. And what we're asking the board to do, and HR worked with the auditor's office on this, is to allow for there to be a split on the premium. We take partial, the first paycheck that they get, and then the other half their second paycheck. So they're not being impacted all at once with that catch up. It's basically they're trying to catch up on their premium costs. We've had input from other departments, and staff have come to see us like, it took up my whole paycheck sort of thing. And we provide really good benefits, and we don't want this to be leave a bad taste in their mouth. Like when they come on board, HR does a great job at orientation explaining this, but they're getting so much information, they're not catching that information from us. And also, again, it's still a financial impact on the employee. If the board were to approve this, where we would be able to split their premium, we would then have them sign an acknowledgement that they realize that should they leave before they've paid what's due, they're required to pay it back. And I'll send it to legal to review.
I don't see an issue with that, especially because new hires are not even gonna really be able to calculate what their first check's gonna be,
Right.
so.
Yeah, it makes it a lot easier. The only question I kind of have is, it's unusual here, is there's no real cure period for health insurance. You know, a lot of places are 90 days, 60 days, something like
We
that.
used to be that way.
To do that, and we are finding more employers pretty much either the start of the month, your premiums, your health insurance is in effect from day to hire, or 30 days. We had a 60-day waiting period, but it equates to almost 90 days depending on what date you get hired on board. And that's a lot of when someone's moving from one agency to another and they have health and benefits, they're looking at that and going, okay, am I gonna have to take Cobra? Cobra's really expensive, people can't afford it. Or how am I gonna make this work if I have that longer duration to get my health insurance benefit? And it's a good recruiting tool, and we're trying to throw every tool we can to get talented individuals hired for all our departments.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, so that's what our initial change was using as a recruiting tool.
And if the board would approve this, we would ask that it go into effect for pay period 19, which is August 27th.
Do you want a motion?
Sure.
I move that we approve the new hire benefit premium deductions with HR to go into effect for pay period 19, which would be August 27th, 2023.
Second.
Commissioner Matari?
Aye.
Chair Duncan?
Aye. All right, motion passes. Thank you. Okay, item 5, KCSO proposed performance metrics. And Under Sheriff Nelson?
That's correct. In further discussion with Sylvia and HR, in reviewing the 5-step measurable, if you will, for our pay matrix, the one change that we did agree upon was on the step 5, where it said acceptance of a voluntary performance plan. The belief was that had a negative connotation, so we agreed in changing that to a career development plan or assigned specialty assignment. I know that there was discussions in regards to possibly concluding or considering for step 5 an intermediate post-certification. Many issues arise from that because I believe that personally puts a lot of pressure on the training budget for the sheriff's office, because if a person chooses to, if you will, seek the bare minimum, the post, which is required per post 20 hours per year, and they come up short while they're putting in for training, but our budget doesn't allow, or our scheduling more importantly, which is a burden right now, that puts us, if you will, the organization on the hook for saying that we didn't aid them in getting to that point. Yes, they do have the opportunity to seek training outside of on their own means, but again, with our staffing right now, that's not always the easiest thing to consider too. The other point being with that, in regards to that consideration that was proposed, was that in trying to stay, if you will, someone in line with the city of Coeur d'Alene, which we're competing with, they don't require their intermediate certificate to obtain what they call their seniority pay. By doing that for us, again, it's going to put the sheriffs, the organization, on the hook by trying to maintain the potential of them obtaining that through our means of providing them professional training. So I would suffice that we submit the measurables as submitted with the change from the performance I'm sorry, the
Voluntary.
voluntary performance plan to the career development plan.
And the written reprimand?
The written reprimand was, if you will, if in any of the steps, it states there that employee must be in good performance status, no documented performance issues within the fiscal year, which falls in line with what we documented. Go ahead.
Yeah, what we would do is everywhere that's indicated,
These
when
would
the
be
board
submitted.
reviews the performance criteria for the staff, we would align that with the sheriff's
Okay.
office. This would align and be
Fall in line
included in
with
the
county
sheriff's.
policy.
Yes, yes, yes. So we're consistent then.
My only thing is that I just got this literally right before the meeting, so I would just like to have a little bit of time to review it and get any questions answered after I've had a chance to look at it.
That'd be fine, and, of course, I'm still gonna be concerned about certificates, because Ada County, which was brought up many, many times, has their basic, intermediate, and advanced and four-year degree in their five-year plan. So we are not a police department. I understand that we want to try to be competitive with our local agencies, but I'm not really sure how many people we've lost in the last 3 years to Coeur d'Alene PD. And so, once again, those are just things I think would be helpful. I understand the undersheriff's issue with the training and stuff like that, but still, to your point, if we're gonna pay more, require more, but this isn't requiring more, it's requiring what sheriff's departments do. So that's all I'll say, but yes, we can pick this up September 7th. Yep.
Yeah, and I think Commissioner Brooks should also be a party to this. So,
All right. Anything else on that item? Then we can go into executive session. We have a 1F, D, and B.
there's no, the FD and B? Is that what you-
Yes.
yeah. So I move that we enter into executive session, 1F, 1D, and 1B.
Second.
Commissioner Matari,
Aye?
Chair Duncan,
Aye. It is 11:27. Is there a motion?
I move that we exit executive sessions 1F, 1D, and 1B with staff to proceed as discussed.
Second.
Commissioner Matari?
Aye.
Chair Duncan?
Aye. All right, public comment? No public here. 11:27, meeting adjourned.